Unconventional Life, welcome. This is your host, Joel Schroeder, tuning in today from Croatia. Today's guest is joining me from Washington, D.C. I have got Marianne Williamson in the house. Marianne, are you ready to take us down the path less traveled?
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Super excited to have this woman on our show. She is an incredible best-selling author, a political activist, spiritual thought leader, and so many other things. For the last 3 decades, Marianne has been a leader in spiritual and religiously progressive circles. I know you've had over 14 or had 14 books, 4 of which have been New York Times #1 bestsellers. And I know your very famous quote from A Return to Love, which is actually a quote I had on my wall when I was in college. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure, which is definitely such an anthem. I know recently you were a candidate in the 2020 presidential primary season and really bringing a lot of your work into reparations for slavery and having that be a core pillar in your campaign, along with so many other things that you've done. You founded Project Angel Food, a nonprofit that's delivered more than 13 million meals, around the world. And I know recently you've also launched the podcast Transform and your Substack, which we'll talk a little bit about, where you have these daily audios and just musings of what's happening in the world. So Marianne, welcome to the show. Fill in any gaps that I might have left out and give us a glimpse into your personal life.
No, you did great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So Marianne, I know a lot of our listeners probably wonder, a lot of this show is, bring in the guests and we obviously have a nature of a conversation, but also just who is the human being behind that person. And if we were a fly on the wall in your world a little bit, just seeing some of the glimmers of what it's like to be you or what it's like to even live in your brain, what would be some of the snapshots or some of the things that we would see?
Well, if you take the things that you described that I do, whether it has to do with my Substack or writing books or speaking, that's what I do all day. I'm a normal human being. I have a daughter who's about to have a wedding and, my own friends and relationships. There's a certain level on which none of our lives are all that different than anybody else's. I'm a human being who gets up in the morning, worries about the same things going on in the world that everybody else is worrying about, wanting to use whatever skills that I have, talents, abilities, experiences to hopefully try to make a difference, just like everybody else is. I think that what the zeitgeist of this moment, in a way, doesn't have to do with where we're different. It has to do with where we're the same. I'm a woman trying to make it through these times, just like everybody else is, you and everybody who's listening to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And where would you say, if you were to look at where there's opportunity, because I think we're at a time in the world where there can be, like you said, so much division or so much opposition, but to really find the commonality and those common threads of unity. And how do you hold that opportunity? And for some of our listeners who may find themselves more in that division or in that divisiveness, any perspective that you can offer?
Well, I believe in the possibility of infinite possibility. I believe in a power that is not of this world. You can call it God, you can call it source, you can call it divine intelligence, whatever you want to call it. But the idea is that in the presence of love, that intelligence, that source, that divinity is activated in worldly terms. That when our lives are dedicated to love, when we are doing our best to remove from our own consciousness the unforgiveness, the blame, the negativity, all those various forms of lovelessness that stand like walls or barriers in front of our love, when we allow those walls to dissolve, something happens. The things we think, the things we say, the energy we carry, the things we attract, and the natural intelligence that is bigger than any of us individually begins to take shape. That to me is the hope. Because that is the miracle. If we only look at worldly happenings, we're in trouble. Democracy is in trouble. The planet is in trouble. Future generations are in trouble. I don't find my hope thinking, well, if we just fix that over here or we just fix that over there, do we need to fix all those things? Absolutely. But ultimately, the problem is on some deep level of our humanity. Now, the good news is that I think millions of people know this. You're in Croatia. I don't care if you're in Croatia or Egypt or Latin America or China or the United States. People are not stupid. And I believe that there is a yearning for this next evolutionary step. And I think just like every cell in the body carries with it a natural intelligence, you go to the pancreas, you go to the lungs, you go to the bones. I think we carry within us a natural intelligence. You go to Croatia, you be in Canada, you be in Latin America, you be in Europe, you be in the United States, you do a podcast, you write a book, you have a child, you start a business. And I think that as we pray, as we meditate, as we do whatever our centering practice is, we're all being, it's like new cells are being awakened of a sense of purpose, of a sense of, I got to do this, I got to do that. I have a feeling I'm supposed to do this. And an energy that is arising. We are collectively pregnant with the next phase of our identity, not only as individuals, but as a species. That's what I feel is going on now. So we only have two choices, really. The death spiral, and a lot of people are feeling that emotionally. That's why a lot of people are depressed, anxious, cynical, angry. People are going out of their minds. Or I'm part of this new possibility going on, and I feel everybody's feeling it. And every time I do something, I'm meeting people, and I know that you're in that place. And we've just got to keep pushing and keep doing it and holding that space. On any given day, one of us might feel like hopeless, and that's the day for somebody else to say, you can lean on me today. And other days, we're the hopeless ones, and other people say, lean on me. But that's the drama of this moment, and that's the hope of this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that duality I've recognized in my own self as we've been in this time. I would say that many others, especially, I believe that the equal degree of success or light that we hold, that equal and opposite degree of, dark that we hold as well. And they're all ultimately the same medicine in how I see it. And for those that are challenged with their duality and holding that, and like you said, at any given moment, sometimes we're on one side of the spectrum more than we are on the other, being able to listen and recenter, I find is such a practice. And oftentimes there's so much noise that makes it challenging to hear that practice. And so is there, and I know you talk about this a lot, Unconventional Lifers, we'll put the links there for your new Substack, where every morning, you are doing these meditations and you're offering these bite-sized things, also giving some of these reflections in your podcast, Transform Itself. But how do you stay in ritual along with that? And how do you stay, just for our listeners, in consistency that allows you to be more in that duality, but more of a spaciousness of it, so you have more perspective, if that makes sense?
Well, first of all, I do not believe in a dualistic universe. I believe in a non-dualistic universe. In that, the darkness of the world is one vast mortal illusion or hallucination. That's what Buddha called it, illusion. Only love is real. And when the human mind thinks loveless thoughts, we manifest within the three-dimensional world, a world which actually seems more real. And that's the duality, that's the darkness. But actually our power lies in knowing it's not as real as it appears. And you invoke the reality that lies beyond it, because all of the darkness that you're talking about is like a veil of illusion in front of a truer truth. You can't get out of it by, as soon as you acknowledge that it's a dualistic universe, you can't really get out of it. It's when you acknowledge it's actually not a dualistic universe. Only one is real. And the other stuff is actually a vast mortal illusion. That's what gives you your power. Now, the spiritual practice that enables you to exercise that musculature, that attitudinal musculature, by which you, with your conviction, work miracles. Remember, when Moses stood before the Red Sea and the water parted, we actually have a power to override the laws in time and space as we know them, but not until we realize that they're not what they appear to be. Now, when you do spiritual practice, whether it's like I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, I do the lessons of the Course every day, transcendental meditation I do, but there's so many different forms of meditation. I mean, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever. It's like going to the gym. It works if you work it. You go to the gym in order to build your physical muscles so that you can be strong, so that you can move. Spiritual practice, you're building a different kind of musculature, mental musculature, emotional musculature that gives you the strength to remain still, that gives you the strength to remain non-reactive, the strength not to move, but to just be there, not to do, but to be, at which point you become like a magnet. And the universe in your presence, there is less obstruction to the unfoldment of the same plan that turns the acorn into the oak tree or the bud into the blossom. How do I remind myself? I have messed up enough in my life that I'm very aware that on any given day that I wake up, drink coffee, download the consciousness of the world, read in the newspaper about how everything bad is happening, take in the assault of all of the stress and all of the anxiety of people all over the world. If I do that, the chances of my being depressed by noon are greatly increased. And the chance of my being effective in the world is radically diminished. So once you get that, you wake up in the morning and you want to meditate and you want to center yourself in God, however you define God, because you know that you'll be an instrument of chaos in your own life and in the life of others if you don't.
Well said. Well said, Marianne. And I also know, just in terms of being that instrument in the world, you recently were in the residence for 2020 election. And what was that like, being that invitation of that listening and be like, I'm going to just do that. I'm going to go for that, which is what you did. And yeah, totally. Give us what was it happening at that time for you?
Well, I've had a career for 37 years, and I have had the privilege of being up close and personal with people whose lives are in trouble. Beginning with my work with the AIDS crisis, I've worked a lot with people who have been diagnosed with serious illness. I've worked a lot with people who are going through those tough times in life. It might be a divorce, it might be a bankruptcy, it might be the death of a loved one. I'm used to that. I understand that, and it's a privilege to be able to be with people when these kinds of things are going on. But I noticed something happening around 20 years ago. And that's that so much of the upset I saw in people's lives was not because of those things that just happen, like illness or death of a loved one. They were the consequences of bad public policy. People who woke up every morning, worked hard, tried to do everything right, and yet the lack of healthcare, the lack of economic opportunity, the lack of basic justice was tearing their lives apart. And it was chronic. And I realized, wait a minute, the system is operating in a way that directly or indirectly makes it so difficult for millions and millions of people. And then that system says to people like me, oh, try to make them feel better when they're going through that. No, you stop doing it to people. And you guys are saying it's a mental health crisis. No. The problem is you are driving people crazy. And I had had enough experience talking to politicians, working with politicians, advising politicians. And at a certain point, enough with that. We have to just take the seats that they're in. And I also feel that for those of us, such as yourself, who work in the field of personal transformation, if you know what really causes change in one heart or one life, which is the kind of work that you and so many others do, if you are someone who knows how one life changes, you are the last person who should be sitting out the great political and economic and social questions of the day. If you know how one life changes, you're the one who has the biggest keys to what makes a society change, because all that a nation is a collection of individuals. Now, the normal political conversation is very transactional. You and I are speaking from transformational. The political conversation is all about externalities. Like if we tweak the pieces of the machine, that's going to fix it. You and I know that an integrative approach to change is necessary. People have to change in their heads, they have to change in their hearts. They have to align themselves with a different sense of what is moral and good and true. And that is as true of a society as it is of an individual. And we're getting to the point where the dominant political conversation threatens to kill us all. I mean, where has that conversation taken us? Our democracy is in peril. Our planet is in peril. The health of millions and millions of people is in peril. Authoritarianism is at the door. And yet we are told by the same system that took us here, oh, we're the only ones you should consider qualified to lead us out of the ditch that we brought us into. Now, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No. Don't expect when that happens. No. You don't know me if you think I'm going to be quiet in front of that. Because you know what? I want to tell you something. The kind of work that you do, Jules, in your work, in your life, anybody teaching transformational wisdom, our skill set has to do with calling people on the games they play. Mm-hmm. We're a corner of the culture that really understands how sociopaths operate. We're a corner of the culture who understands what addiction does to you. So we're the ones who can look at that system and go, you guys are sociopaths here. This is a sociopathic economic system. And just like you drink too much, you could die. You take too many drugs, you could die. If that kind of mentality continues, there are already people dying because of it.
Yeah.
There are already other species dying because of it. The planet itself is beginning to die because of it. We must stage an intervention. That's why I ran for president.
Yeah, well, there's so much I can say to that. And I think what jumps out the most is your radical commitment to truth is how I'll say it as. And I don't know if that resonates with you, but it is the perseverance and the pursuit of what is actually true and what is actually real. And the truth has a frequency to it. And, I had a near-death experience, which many of our listeners know about 5-6 years ago. It was a wakeboarding accident where I ended up in this coming out of the MRI, approached by this white figure, 6 black shadow council conversation of, Jules, you have more work to do in the world. Do you want to do it? They thought I was paralyzed. They thought my neck was broken. And at the time I said, yes, as long as I don't come back as a vegetable. That next moment I was zapped back into my body, felt this energy, forge my neck back together, shoot down my spine. And the moment that I woke up that day, everything shifted. It was the completion of life being driven by me and the start of life coming through. And that shift, many things unfolded, including this work, this business, the transformational stuff, the events, the podcast, all of that, Forbes, all the things. But at the core of it, the tolerance or lack of tolerance for anything less than the truth, just dial notch 1,000%. And that, I feel, is the inquiry that many of us are being faced with right now. Many of us listening to this podcast, many of us in our world, we notice and we feel that there is an incongruence. Sometimes we don't have the logical awareness or the words to identify it yet it's a felt sense and it's disruptive, my own experience of it. And I'm curious your take on how you relate to truth, and particularly for those listening, part of the call that they're being asked to do in their own inquiry, which ultimately, in my opinion, is a foundation for where transformation and ultimately where real change actually emerges from.
Well, I 100% agree with you. And the word radical means of the roots. So when you talk about radical truth telling, anything less than radical truth telling is an inadequate response to the challenges of this time. So not only do I share with you this commitment to radical truth telling, but I feel, as I'm sure you do, the urgency of this moment. There is no grace period left. The era of data collection is over. We know the principles, those of us who know the spiritual and transformational principles, and we also know what's happening to the planet. Now we need to add to our radical truth telling a willingness to stand on that truth, even in the face of what can be very vicious resistance on the part of the system as it is. What we need now is courage. What we need now is sisterhood and brotherhood, where we will support one another. When you see a radical truth teller and you see them viciously punished for telling the truth, for you to stand up, for you to say, I like that person, I agree with that person. That's what needs to happen now. We need to recognize that to be a radical truth teller at this time does not always get you applause. And it doesn't get you applause from everybody. And I think a lot of people in our corner of transformational wisdom are so concerned with brand protection that they are unwilling to say the deeper truths that they know to be true because they're afraid it will get them fewer clients or fewer clicks. I think that that's really that personal characteristic of courage, of willingness, of recognition that this is not always going to be easy, but we have to do it, that this is what our ancestors did, that this is one of those moments in history where it will make all the difference, whether enough people stand up and, as you say, show a commitment to radical truth. Nothing less will be enough. And I think more and more people are recognizing, as I said, the urgency of this hour.
Yeah,
we're in a little bit of a planetary emergency at this point.
Yeah, I feel like, the age of, like you said, being on the front line, it's been like a multi-year process. And that moment of go time, we are in full go time. So unconventional affairs, if we, go ahead.
Well, when you go into the vertical, the problems are on the horizontal. The truth is on the vertical. There's a line in the Course in Miracles where it says, miracles collapse time. When you go into radical truth, it's like where dharma overrides karma. Karma is action, reaction, action, reaction. When you enter dharma, when you enter grace, there's an immediate rising up, and things go much faster. And much as you said, this is go time. But go time is you only go if supported by radical commitment to truth, regardless of who laughs at you. And I think for myself, what I learned from running for president, they would rather not kill you. There are other ways to get you out of the conversation through character assassination, for instance. And this is an age-old thing they do with women who are saying things that are inconvenient to the system. She's crazy. This is ancient. She's dangerous. It used to be witch burning. Now it's bitch
I was just going to say
it. She's a witch. She's a witch. She's a witch. They just changed the continent. Oh, she's a bitch. She's a bitch. She's dangerous. She's crazy. She's cuckoo. They if they can make enough people laugh at you, that's enough to get you out of the conversation. And that's why we have to just keep going and not care who laughs and not care. Although I can say from personal experience, you do care, but it doesn't stop you. And I think that the more people wake up to this, the more, especially women, will start supporting our sisters when we see our sisters going through this, rather than remaining silent because we don't want them to do it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are in such a collective uprising for women, even a wealth uprising, a wealth transfer. I mean, to see it moving through a lot of the communities that I've been involved in, a lot of communities that I help enable, that I'm affiliated with, it is wild to see moving. And I know you're very close to that conversation in a lot of different ways. And I'd love for you to share about the Substack that you just recently launched and just a little bit about what that is, because I know a lot of that focus was in bringing more community together and really carrying on this conversation in more of an impactful way.
Thank you. There's a line in the Course in Miracles that says, an idea grows stronger when it is shared. And of course, that's what's happening, whether on your podcast, somebody's book. It's the idea of creating a resonant field of energy because everybody's on the same page about something, whether they're listening to a podcast, reading a book, or whatever. I do different things. I'm interested in different topics. I believe, as you and I have been talking about here, real change must be grounded in a spiritual conviction. At the same time, we have to talk about the environment. We have to talk about the forever war machine and what just happened in Afghanistan. We have to talk about healthcare. We have to talk about those things. So I created the Substack for people who want to meditate in the morning and make waves in the afternoon. That in the morning, I send you a meditation, encourage you to do your own spiritual work. And then that afternoon, usually late at night, I'm sending you information that maybe would really help expand your intellectual horizons, your political horizons, your cultural horizons. Last night, I talked about the oil spill that occurred yesterday, over 8,000 acres in Huntington Beach, California. The day before that, I talked about Chevron's prosecution of an environmental activist lawyer who brought them to account for poisoning the Amazon River down in Ecuador. My last podcast was about Afghanistan and what really happened there, which in many ways is contrary to the official analysis. So I think it has to be both and right now.
Yeah.
Jules. It has to be both and. It has to be grounding ourselves in the heart and expanding the brain. And it's the combination of the two that's going to forge a new future, because it forges a new us.
Absolutely. And Unconventional Lifers, we'll throw that up at our link at unconventionallifeshow.com if you'd like to check out that Substack and join that conversation there. And, even when it comes to approaching and assimilating information and news, I know a lot of, especially in conscious or even awake communities, it's like, I don't want to deal with it. Or it's like, there's so much going on in the world. I don't even know how to participate in it, or whatever that might be. But to actually take in and be the agent of change rather than the passive, to be in that active role, it takes something. And I imagine for you, to be in the practice regularly of taking, whether it's the oil spill or whether the conversation around Afghanistan or whatever it might be, to actually interpret it in a way that you can assimilate and then share it, and then also be at the forefront of, change in it. There's a process that I imagine at some point, you've come into, and I'd love for you, if you could just share a little about how you do that, really with the perspective of allowing others to be active participants in the conversation rather than feeling overwhelmed and being more of in a passive seat.
Well, that's why I created the podcast, not just the podcast. I created the podcast as well, but the podcast is part of the larger Substack universe. I'll give it to you every night in bite-sized pieces, right? Mm-hmm. This is what I think we need to look at today. So hopefully my work helps people do that. But I think there's something deeper for us to look at. We've got to stop supporting the ditzy woman thing that we sometimes cover with pseudo-spiritual perspective. Oh, well, the only reason I'm ditzy is because I'm an empath, and it's just, I'm so sensitive. As women, we need to look at each other and go, oh, really? 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 No, the era of the ditzy woman has got to fall away. The era of the politically disengaged in the name of some pseudo-spiritual idea has got to pass away. There is no spiritual or religious path anywhere that gives any of us a pass on acknowledging and addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. So don't claim you're spiritual if you're only looking at manifesting your own dreams. Call it whatever you want, but it's not spiritual. The truth of the matter is that many women, particularly in societies like ours, that are manifesting the wealth, manifesting their dreams, they making all these things, are the last people who, from a sort of cosmic perspective, get to sit out the process of getting dirt under our fingernails and getting down into the weeds. Now, I do understand, because I share it, how people don't want to hear the same old conversation. That's why I'm changing it. So, you can read my book, Politics of Love, which I have right here. You can read my book, Politics of Love. You want a spiritual take on politics? That was my book. I wrote a book called Healing the Soul of America. I do my podcast. The spiritual and political conversation, not only in my work, but in terms of the deeper theory and foundational principles, were already articulated by Martin Luther King Jr., were already articulated by Mahatma Gandhi. So this idea that we're too sensitive to look at it, we've just got to stop respecting it in ourselves or others. Also, we have to call bullshit on, I don't want to look at it because what you focus on expands. Can you imagine if you went to the oncologist and you had stage 1 cancer, and the oncologist said, it's only stage 1. Let's not look at it, because if we look at it, it will expand. Some things expand because you don't look at them. He's only beaten you up once or twice. So let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it. I know there's a little domestic abuse, but it's only a little. So let's not focus on it or it'll expand. No, it'll focus on it if you don't look at it. If it'll expand if you don't. So I think we just need to make ourselves comfortable with that conversation, with the language and the perspective that we already cherish. And that's why I think people like you, people like myself, those of us who are saying to those in the transformational community, hey, we have to address what's happening in the world. You're not honoring your incarnation if you don't. And not only that, we're living at a time where nobody's going to get away with that for much longer. I don't care what the public issue is, it will make its way to your private door. You know, I've been saying to people, Jules, for years, good luck with all that green juice. Good luck with all that gluten-free. They're poisoning the air. They're poisoning the food. They're poisoning the water. How much do you think you can wall yourself off from all this? You know, it's interesting. I think I already mentioned this oil spill in Huntington Beach, Newport Beach. Mm-hmm. That is like a mecca, a center for a lot of the stuff that you and I are talking about. Guess what? There's oil in the water. That's your beach.
Accident, no accident, right?
Mm-hmm. And we can do this, Jules. And I think women such as yourself, you know, we talk about the rise of the divine feminine. The goddess expresses through women, through real people. And sometimes she's fierce. She doesn't just wear cut velvet. Sometimes she's fierce. And when you mess with her children, she messes. I mean, I don't know how much more people need to see.
Yeah.
This is not an age where it's going to happen. It's now an age where it is happening. And each of us, I think, have the opportunity to rise up, step it up. And that's another thing. I think most people that I know, and probably that you know, are already doing this. Mm-hmm. What I see in myself and others is, you're right, we are doing it, but we all need to step it up just a little.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well said. And those ripples of impact, one conversation at a time, is such the nature of this Unconventional Life conversation. And Unconventional Lifers, that Transform podcast, I know it's on iTunes. We'll also link that up at our show notes at unconventionallifeshow.com. So I'd love to jump into the rapid fire round, series of quick lightning questions coming at you as we wrap up the show. So are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right. Question number 1, fill in the blank. Speaking about yourself, if you really knew me, you would know what?
I'm more sensitive than you think.
Next question. What is one surprising fact that most people may not know about you?
I don't know. I think I'm pretty out there with who I am. I think I'm kind of an open book in a way.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything, actually.
Yeah. Okay, great. Next question. What is one question that people don't ask and you wish they would?
The only thing that comes up for me is a deeper conversation about what's happening between Israel and the Palestinians. Deeper conversations about the forever war machine. I wish people would go deeper. Americans are not stupid, but we sometimes don't have deep answers because we're not asking deep questions. And I wish people would ask deep questions about things that matter most.
Yeah, well said. Lastly, Marianne, what does living the unconventional life mean to you?
Waking up every day and doing it your way. What feels good to you. You know, when I turned 50, a friend of mine said to me, 50 is the age past which you don't care what other people think anymore. And 60 is the age past which not only do you not care, you have to do it your way. It's like the meaning of success. Going back to radical truth-telling. Radical truth-telling is unconventional because the conventional conversation is not radical and not particularly truthful.
Yeah, well said. Marianne, tell us, for those that want to follow more along in your journey, we'll obviously put those links to Unconventional Lifers at our show notes at unconventionallifeshow.com. What's the best place for people to follow along, stay in touch, and all those good things?
Well, thank you. Thank you. First of all, if anybody wants to be on my mailing list, they can sign up at marianne.com. But if you go to Substack, so my Substack is mariannewilliamson.substack.com.
Yeah.
All there.
We'll throw that link up at our show notes at unconventionallifeshow.com. Marianne, it was such a pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for taking the time, for just being a stand to the merging of worlds and to the truth. And I so admire what you're doing. So it's great to have you on.
Right back at you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.